So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle or replay, and you may notice that things do look a little bit different, and that's because I've been trying to fiddle around with Reshade a little bit. It always feels like I'm fighting a losing battle with Reshade. It always looks better than vanilla, but it never looks quite like I want it to. So this, I've actually fiddled around with it quite a bit, so do let me know what you think. I think overall it does look nice like this. There's obviously the inclusion of stuff like God Rays and a bit of the blur, which might get a little bit weird in places, but I think overall it is an improvement. But do let me know your feedback on that, because Reshade is certainly not an exact science. There's a lot of sliders and things that you can add on, so if we do want to go back to the old settings, I do have that saved as well, so it's no big deal. But obviously this is on CARN DUM, which is on a rather dark map usually, and my issues with Reshade in the past have been on overly dark and overly bright maps, and this one does pep things up a little bit. We'll see how this setting works on a brighter map as well, I think, later, to see if things are alright. But this is one that I've been sat on for a little while, since the first half of January really, so I didn't want to keep the person who sent it to me waiting any longer. So I'm going to be doing CARN DUM today, and obviously CARN DUM is interesting because the first layer down here does have a lot of space which the attackers can exploit, but there's also this wedding cake style defense here, which obviously means you can put skirmishers up on the higher level and they have a very easy time shooting down into the attackers as they move forward. We actually have 3 orc factions on the attack, and I believe we have dwarves, elves and Isengard on the defense, so I guess Saruman had a change of heart perhaps? Yeah, we do have some Isengard troops back here, so change of heart for Saruman. I don't know if Uruk-hai, well, I don't know if the elves and dwarves would want to fight side by side with Uruk-hai, but there you go. The Witch King, meanwhile, has come to reclaim his homeland, and he's come to try and take CARN DUM. So we'll go through the attackers first of all, and we'll start off with the player who sent me the replay, who is playing as Angmar itself, and that is Stallion24. So, he's of course got some Snaga Stalkers pushing the ram. You may as well get 1 unit of them because they're free. And in melee, they're actually not as terrible as something like Orc Fodder. They will actually do a little bit of damage, but obviously, you know, their capabilities are very limited. We have the .96 Barrow Wights over here, which are incredibly durable but very slow, although their speed is only usually a major problem anyway, in field battles where they can lag behind the Angmar rush a little bit and they have to sort of pull it back in the late game. In a siege, however, that's much less of a problem because obviously the enemy aren't going anywhere. You can take your time as much as you need, and as soon as the Barrow Wights are delivered to the front line, it can be a real problem for the defenders to try and do something about them. Not impossible though, particularly with the defending armies we're going to be seeing today. We have some Guardians of CARN DUM over here as well, and they do have the armour upgrade. The Guardians of CARN DUM, not the biggest damage dealers for line infantry, but they are very, very solid, very durable, which means obviously the orcs are going to keep fighting for longer. And overall, they're probably not on the same sort of level as something like the Castamir's Legion, maybe just a little bit below that. I do believe with the armour upgrade they are a more integral part to the map. They are slightly stronger, I believe, than the Uruk-hai infantry, just because of the context of the army that they are in. Angmar do have a lot of powerful infantry, whereas Isengard are a little bit more reliant on their infantry, their Uruk-hai infantry and their pikes. Over here we've got the Scourge Raiders, which the Scourge Raiders will be substantially different in the upcoming .97 patch. They will have a missile attack to them, which will give them a little bit more utility, maybe make it so that they're brought a little bit more often, because as it stands they are a very fragile damage-dealing infantry unit, which is not the end of the world. That does mean that they can be quite useful, but in a situation like this, where the defenders will have a skirmish advantage, they can be shot to pieces very, very easily. We'll see if that is their fate today. We have the Hammer Guard, which is not going to be where the General is, but the Hammer Guard, obviously with their rusted armour and rusted warhammers, incredibly damaging. They are certainly one of, if not the strongest, multiple HP shock troop in the game. Again, that is very debatable. There are numerous contenders for that. The Sons of Durin, of course, from the Dwarves, and the Tharbad Warhammers from Cardland, the Witch Realm Enslavers from Rudour, but the Hammer Guard, incredibly damaging, particularly to armoured units. Speaking of which, we do have some Halberds, which obviously the Halberdiers with their armour-piercing phalanx can be incredibly, incredibly useful to just sort of make sure that you've got a nice anchor to your line. Again, the Angmar Halberds offer that at a very, very cheap cost as well. Orc Halberds in particular, just because they've got so many numbers, can be very useful to just sort of throw in and make sure that your Orc line doesn't fall apart, but naturally very weak to arrows, and ultimately their lack of quality will bite them unless you support them properly. Got a catapult, which there are some destructible walls on CARN DUM, but overall the moat and the bridges means that your ways into the settlement are relatively limited, so we'll see how useful the catapult actually is. Some Blackwatch Legion, obviously very good pushing units, so great shields. I know that people aren't really the biggest fans of pushing units, but when it comes to the Orc faction, sometimes they do need it, because if they get caught up in a sustained melee with something like the Dwarves in a choke point where they can't move, they will just be cut to pieces over time, even with all their numbers. So the Blackwatch Legion, certainly a big part of Angmar in particular, because of how aggressive they usually are. 2 units of Blackwatch Legion. In fact, then we have more Witch Realm Pikemen to add to the Phalanx, mixed in with some Angmar Halberds. Obviously, the Witch Realm Pikemen. Pikes have got substantially more range than Halberds, but obviously not armor piercing. But the Witch Realm Pikemen also decently well armored, pretty much on a similar sort of level, particularly if you upgrade their armour to the Uruk-hai pikemen, but obviously Angmar can't bring pikes in the same sort of numbers as Isengard. But very comparable, the two factions, because of how powerful their infantry can be at the higher levels, and obviously they are orcs at the end of the day. There's also some Gundabad Guard in here, I believe. I can see their shields mixed in here. And the Gundabad Guard, yeah, Gundabad Guard are higher tier spears. You don't see them a great deal because the Guardians of CARN DUM are just better in 0.96. But with the changes to 0.97, something like the Gundabad Guard should become a lot more viable. Obviously the two trolls, the Trolls of Angmar, the Trolls of Gundabad, very, very powerful. A lot of damage capability from both of them. Obviously heavily armoured trolls should be able to do a lot of damage to the defenders. The Witchers, again, another unit which people are mixed on. I personally think the Witchers are fine because they are incredibly high risk. If the enemy skirmishers see them, they will just get cut to pieces. You know, they do have a decent amount of hit points. I think it's 4, but that's nowhere near the level of something like the Nazgul, so they cannot really be that anchor in your line that can do a lot of damage. They will, generally speaking, they will either net you a lot of value, or they'll just get shot before they do anything. So that is a big risk for Angmar to bring because they are expensive. And as I'm sure you saw, the general is going to be the Witch Realm Blackguard. Won't be seeing the Inquisitors today, but that's to be expected in a siege battle like this. The Blackguard, we've seen time and time again their credentials in melee, arguably the strongest sword and shield unit in the game at the moment in 0.96, alongside the likes of the Wardens of the White Tower and some of the Dwarven units, like the Guards of CITADEL. Now, the central attacker, we have Mordor, played by Ricky Beagle. I think he's played Mordor in pretty much every game I've seen him in, so definitely one of Sauron's faithful. And obviously Mordor, similar in some ways to Angmar, although they do have a little bit more, well, they've got a few more options at range, certainly, than Angmar. We have the Orc Fodder, which naturally just going to be pushing the route. Got another unit of fodder as well, so they're a little bit further away. They might be waiting for their reinforcements from the other side of the map. A little bit spread out as well, so they better hope there's no defensive cavalry, otherwise there could be some gaps here. Heavy maulers, so decent AP. Again, they look pretty scary with those giant axes with the serrated edges, but appearances can be a little bit deceptive. They are fragile, you know, you definitely need to support them, otherwise they will just fall away very quickly, as orcs are wont to do. We also have some Black Legion of Barad-dûr. The Black Legion, of course, not quite as strong individually as the Blackwatch Legion, but there are more of them, so it's much of a muchness really. So they're very much equivalent units, shield bashing their way through the enemy. Some Sauron's Will, as well as it looks like some Temple Executioners in there as well, so a potent combination of damage here. The AP and the encouragement from the Sauron's Will, and then obviously the very elite Temple Executioners with the armour upgrades. Very, very strong. They'll be getting a new model in the next patch, of course. Troll Catapult. Faster to move around the battlefield, which is a bigger deal than you might expect because Medieval 2 artillery is a real pain in the ass to move. And also the Troll Catapult, unlike regular artillery crew, which are literally the worst units in melee in the game, Troll Catapult, not so much. They will fight for you in melee, not as strong as regular trolls of course, but they will still at least do some damage. Around on heavy maulers over here, very spread out army indeed. We have the Temple Guard. AP archers can be very, very useful. I think they're actually more useful when in an offensive siege. They're probably at their least useful, to be fair. They're still useful, obviously, but on a field you can sort of focus down units of knights and individual targets, and you can do the same in a defensive siege. A little bit more difficult to use them in an offensive siege, but the Temple Guard obviously very strong in melee as well, so it's definitely understandable why he brought them. There's also the general over here. Very spread out army indeed. We have the Olag-hai back here, as well as some Orc Javelins. Olag-hai, of course, very, very powerful over a long period of time. He's got a second unit of Olag-hai as well, so he's actually got a very spread out elite army. This leads me to believe he's probably going to wait for his ally to come forward first so that he can be the hammer blow that follows them in, because you definitely don't want to lose a lot of these elite troops like the Black Legion and the Olag-hai early before they really do anything. Heavy maulers, of course, are going to be very susceptible at range as well. More Temple Executions and Sauron's Will, so definitely a very quality focused army with just some Orc fodder at the front. And he does actually have a cavalry unit as well. Again, I've said before that bringing lancers in an offensive siege is risky. It's not always a bad idea. CARN DUM does have more space on its bottom layer than Minas Tirith does, but even so, the Númenórean lancers will need to be on their toes in order to actually get some value off. And then the final attacking army, we of course have the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, played by the Steward of Dale. And the Misty Mountains, generally speaking, tend to bring a fair amount of trash with a few individual units of quality. He's got some Goblin Infantry, of course, again, that free unit that the Orc factions except Isengard get. Some Black Uruks carrying the ladders. That's an interesting move. I definitely wouldn't send them up first because they are one of the few units in melee that you can send in and expect them not to die like dogs en masse. We also have the heavy Goblin Spears, an ever-present for the Misty Mountains in 0.96, and to be fair, I think in 0.97 as well, they will still be very, very common because the AP is very useful, even if they won't be quite as good moving forward. We also have the Cave Trolls on both sides, excellent line breakers. The defenders are going to have to be on their toes to deal with them. A bit of an insurance policy, I think, down here more than anything else. The Bolg's champions, they are obviously beasts in a cav-to-cav engagement, very, very strong indeed. So I think if any defensive cavalry is on the move, the Bolg's champions will be hunting them down very, very quickly. Then back here we also have some heavy goblin crossmen, of course crossbows, if they get into a good position when you're on the attack, very, very deadly. White Uruk Fearmongers will be moved over to Dol Guldur when they're finally added, but I believe Ered Luin are the next factions that are being added to the test build, so that will be a little while yet. And also the Goblin King's Bodyguard with Azog heading them up. Very commonplace to see here. So let's have a look at what the defenders have got going on. We have Isengard played by Grenlock. We have Isengard played by Grenlock over here. So we've got some Uruk-hai archers and Uruk-hai infantry with the armour upgrades on the walls. I don't think they're going to come under too much pressure early. I'd be very surprised if Mordor moves forward quickly with how spread out they are. Obviously got some Uruk-hai pikemen, which are going to be a very good tool for trying to hold the line. Up here on the walls as well, more archers and more infantry, and that's pretty much it over here. Pretty light defence actually on the lower layer, so I think they're probably going to be trying to use their skirmishers from the middle layer, which is a common enough tactic. We have Damn 4-star XD Hellcase.com, so I'm just going to be calling him Hellcase, I think, playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. Erebor, of course, not quite as powerful as CARN DUM, but the Blacklock Engineers as an individual unit are very potent. We'll see if they're on the field. Ironfoot Warriors, of course, are a good mainline infantry unit. Dwarves with their heavy infantry, obviously, going to be bringing a lot of that, more Ironfoot Warriors. Ironfoot Pikes as well, they probably need to be supported a little bit here. A single unit Pikes is not going to stop an onrushing Orc army without help. We also have more Ironfoot Warriors over here. And then finally, we have Vulcan, DF Vulcan, who's going to be playing as Mirkwood. DF are obviously that's Bobo's clan, and he's very much dwarf-centric, so I'm quite surprised to see Mirkwood from DF of all things. So we have some 30 tower, which obviously they can hide normally, but hiding is not really going to be too important here on this map. But their missile capabilities, Mirkwood obviously very, very potent. Over here we do have some Aradirith Amon Lang. They need to be careful because if they get shot down off the wall from the catapult, that will be a dreadful loss. Fantastic unit all around with the AP from those axes. Bigger presence from Mirkwood here on the lower layer than the other two factions, which surprises me a little bit with how many skirmishes they have. Hiri Peng down here on the lowest layer. Also got some stakes on the front here just to sort of guard the gate, but the rest of it going to be made up of Megil E. Erin, which as far as an infantry unit goes, not any old garbage will beat them. Basic elven units obviously very, very potent. It's going to take really the full force of Angmar to trade efficiently with them. CARN DUM Guardians will, and obviously backed up by all of those numbers as well with the trolls. They do need to be careful. 30 tower actually in range already, so that elven range really paying off. A lot of Hiri Alth as well, which obviously a very, very potent elven line infantry unit, but they are fairly expensive obviously, of course, but they will outclass really anything that Angmar has brought in numbers. Only the finest Angmar units will be able to go toe-to-toe with the Hiri Alth. Similar story with the Hiri Ek, obviously only they've got Spear Malice, so not quite as focused around dealing damage, but will be able to hold the line, particularly against mass pushes potentially. I do like the details on CARN DUM with all of these like forges and arenas that the Orcs have got going on. We'll see if the forces of good can actually hold on to them, although Isengard, definitely a bit turncoat behaviour going on here. Hiri Lang, heavy elven swordsman, obviously again, this is the sort of unit which can be extremely potent against the Orcs because their melee defense is very high, their damage potential is very high against the lightly armoured Orcs. They can carve through them. If they're not being sort of focused down by arrows or going up against something like trolls, they can really, really do a lot of damage very, very quickly. And going into the middle, we're going to be seeing a lot more Dwarven units. So Erebor Legionaries, the Sons of Durin, are over here, so settle some grudges with the Witcher Realm Hammer Guard, I would assume. Ironfoot Spears as well. We do have a Mirkwood Catapult, as well as some crossbows, which are going to be backing them up. Delupeng, Em and Dwyer, obviously very pleased to see them, because Rangers are such a prolific defensive tool. Axguard of Erebor also over here. Again, the Blacklock Engineers, good units back here. Dragon Slayers, Obsidian Guard, very quality focused core here from the Dwarves, with a bit of backup from the Elves. And then the bulk of the Isengard army seems to be over here. We've got Berserkers, we've got crossbows, infantry again, more Berserkers and more pikemen, and then their elites going to be just sort of kept back here in the town centre. Lurtz hunting pack, so every one of the defenders has got a body piercing unit. We have some guards of Orthanc. Oh, excuse me. Athalion Inanwaith as well, the Palace Guard. That's going to be where the Mirkwood generals hanging out. Thranduil fighting side by side with the Orcs of all things. The Nazkai, another very, very potent unit. Super Berserkers really. And then Dane going to be in the Highborns of Erebor, which is a pretty safe place to put him. So, without further ado, let's begin. And I hope that these new settings don't cause the game to crash, because I think this is a little bit more demanding than the settings that I was using previously. But we'll see. I mean, this isn't going to be a huge cluster of a fight, so I think we should be fine. Meanwhile, we can see the Angmar just moving in. I might make a cut depending on how things go, although over here we can see already the Orc fodder moving forward, and actually they will... Actually, no, that's just the arrow towers, so really they're going to be dying for nothing, because obviously the arrow towers don't eat into your ammunition supply. If the Uruk-hai archers were shooting at them, this would have been worthwhile. Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned perhaps about when the body piercing starts going off about whether this will crash or not, but we should be fine. There's also the potential for some frame drops here as the artillery starts to open up. And 32,000 frames is probably about right for a 3v3 on a settlement of this size, so I can imagine we're going to see a fairly by-the-books opening here, where they start to try and open up a little bit on these walls. Interestingly enough, those Thurney Tower are actually shooting into the Orc fodder. If I were Ricky Beagle, I'd stick them into loose formation and just let this happen, because that's arrows that are effectively being wasted. Mirkwood arrows as well, which are very potent. Obviously the Thurney Tower have got the 6 missile damage, rather than the normal 5 that you expect from sort of an average archer for a faction. And just using them on Orc fodder, not really worth their time. This is exactly the sort of thing that the Orc fodder are meant for. Meanwhile, Angmar seems to be going in to try and hit the Mirkwood units rather than sort of focus down the walls, which might actually be a worthwhile endeavour. Angmar of all factions are not going to have too many issues trying to force their way through a singular choke point. Of all the factions, they should be the best at that, with all those Trolls, Blackwatch Legion, and obviously the Barrow Wights means it's very unlikely that Mirkwood are going to be able to break the assault. Angmar as an army will fall before their army starts to break in this situation. Angmar do tend to be a little bit more quality-centric, and in this case that is true. So while their lower tier units like the Snaga of course will have bad morale, the rest of their army should do fairly well for themselves. The Barrow Wights also moving forward, the Snaga trundling the ram into position, sort of fulfilling their role very much as the fodder. They do need to be careful, however, because those fire arrows coming from the arrow towers, obviously CARN DUM is a settlement, a custom settlement that does have those arrow towers. The ram could catch fire and be destroyed here, which is certainly not an uncommon occurrence. I do like the settlement from a distance on this reshade setting, actually. That's one thing that I think is certainly improved. I think the lighting certainly looks a little bit better. Covers up a little bit of the poor graphics that Medieval 2 tends to have at long range as well. Like it's kind of, the pop-in is kind of noticeable in Medieval 2. Old game now, of course. Mirkwood opening up a little bit on Mordor. Now, Mordor needs to be a little bit careful actually, because Mirkwood very clearly trying to snipe out the Troll Catapult. Might be worthwhile for this to happen, however, because obviously if the defenders lose their artillery piece, that is a bigger loss for the defenders than the attackers. The attackers, of course, have got 2 catapults to the defenders 1. See here the Orc fodder, so making some holes in the wall. I have also turned down the particle effects. That should cause less lag in the future. Only going to take 1 more. There we go. The first hole in CARN DUM's blackened walls appears. As the Orc fodder slowly starts to trundle into position, that Mirkwood catapult still trying to take on the Troll catapult. No hits actually yet, which is actually surprising considering they have turned the fire ammunition off. You expect the catapults to be a little bit more accurate when that happens. Meanwhile, the Misty Mountains swivelling around over here. No defensive cavalry, so the Volks champions and the Númenórean lancers can be used in a fully offensive fashion, which here on the lower layers could actually be pretty good for them. If the defenders sort of leave just a skeleton crew down here, they could leave the odd unit behind, which is exactly where lancers and I don't really know what to call the really high tier wargs. I guess they kind of count as knights as well, the orc equivalent to knights anyway, ghetto knights. Volk champions of course can be very, very deadly on the charge though, just like standard knights. I think that is going to be the first piece of artillery that we see fall. Indeed it is. The first loss for the Troll Catapult. They have already made a hole in the wall, and they are also going to try and make a second hole in the wall. So that's going to be 3 choke points very close together, but the more surface area the orcs can open up here, the more likely it is they're going to be able to do some damage. This is a good move here by Hellcase, because these Orc fodder have moved forward all on their own. And there's no missile units around here to really take advantage of this, so the Ironfoot Warriors would of course smash the Orc fodder into submission very, very easily. So this ram is probably just going to have to stay there for the time being. And they're going to have to just rely on these sort of side choke points they're going to open up, and then they'll open up the gate a little bit later, I would imagine. Meanwhile, we have over here the siege towers getting into position. The Gundabad Guard pushing them up, as well as another unit of Gundabad Guard. Now the Gundabad Guard are spears with the spear malice, so they're not really going to do too well against Hiri Alth. But they are durable enough that they should at least clear a space on the wall for something a little bit more substantial to follow them in. As I say that, the gate falls as well, the ram doing its grisly work over here. And the Barrow Wights, I imagine, are going to be the first ones in. Maybe the Gundabad Guard as well. That's a very durable front line, but ultimately I would imagine that Mirkwood are not going to be too concerned about this, unless the full force of Angmar comes forward and all of the trolls move in as well. The Orkfod are actually sniping the gate. The Ironfoot Warriors caught napping over there. We'll go over there in just a second. But the Megil Yeren are very strong as long as the fight remains static, but as soon as mass starts to come into the equation, the elves obviously lower unit models, lower mass overall, and they do need to be careful because that is one of the things that Angmar can certainly bring to bear. Although, a bit of a split army over here. All of the units in here have been committed, but a lot of the units are a bit further back. Understandable because of all of the elven arrow pressure. They do need to be careful here. Megil Yeren closing in on the gate a little bit. The Snaga are the first ones to be committed to the melee, and of course the Megil Yeren are going to have absolutely no issues whatsoever dealing with the Snaga. Guardians of CARN DUM with the armour upgrades will be a much stronger opponent, but I think the Barrow Wights need to be committed immediately here, so that they can try and be a little bit more aggressive. You really need to sort of commit a lot of your strength all at once as Angmar, I think, to really get the most out of their army. Well, let's go and see what's happening over here. Yeah, the Ironfoot Warriors here, the second hole over here. Actually, no, that's not the Ironfoot Warriors. They weren't caught napping. It was actually the gate over here that has been opened. Ricky Beagle with his Orc fodder staring menacingly through the gap, and the Steward of Dale is over here as well. He's going to start getting his Black Uruks up onto the walls, which the upgraded Uruk-hai infantry and the Black Uruks of the mountains, that should be a fight where neither side really has too distinctive an advantage. The Black Uruks have got sort of slightly more skill and more damage dealing potential, being a two-hander sword unit, but the Uruk-hai infantry are also pretty damn durable, and they are certainly no slouches when it comes to line infantry. I would say that the biggest concern for Isengard over here will probably be the fact they've only got 2 banks of pikes in a V formation over here, which obviously is good. There's no reinforcements really nearby other than archers, and they won't be committed to melee. If the cave trolls came barreling forward, that would be the end of this position, and then the attackers could start wrapping up the lines all along. And I do think Angmar might actually need a little bit of assistance, because they're getting the Barrow Wights in here. Victory does seem certain. The Guardians of CARN DUM coming through here as well. This is more of a glitch than anything else. Obviously, CARN DUM, I think, was made by the Divide and Conquer team. So the gate really is just a little bit bigger than it appears there. It's not that the Gundabad Guard are coming down from the walls. Angmar coming forward with a lot of numbers, actually, and now the ball is in Mirkwood's court. Mirkwood could commit forward more resources here and do some real damage to Angmar's army. However, if they committed men now, they would not be able to pull them out later. And I do feel as though the Isengard and Dwarven defences are much more of a skeleton crew, which are much more likely to be overwhelmed by the Misty Mountains and Mordor. So it does look as though Mirkwood are going to be sending forward more men, however. Some Hiri Alth getting here on the front line as well. The problem that Mirkwood have, however, and indeed a problem that they in particular have, is against pikes. Other elven factions can also struggle a little bit, but Mirkwood have got no pikes of their own. Really, it comes down to them trying to use their archers to try and focus down pikemen, which you can see there's already some missiles being used to try and kill off these pikes from the walls up there. The Aradiritham on length with good missile damage as well. But in a sustained melee, that phalanx can keep the elves with their superior damage and skill at arm's length, which is exactly what you want to do. So overall, the Witchround pikemen, the Barrow Wights, and the Guardians of CARN DUM doing their best. It's an even fight, however. The Hiri Alth are a very, very strong unit, and they will be able to outclass the Guardians of CARN DUM. But I do feel as though Mirkwood have stacked up far more than their allies, so they kind of need to keep committing resources over here to make this stand worth it, otherwise all these men will really fall apart for nothing. Now that you've committed against the Barrow Wights, you're in there. The spider's web has been spun. Meanwhile, here we go, yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to see from the Misty Mountains. This is a good move, because it's only these pikes that are here. The cave trolls will be able to bash right through these lines. It's a very dense block of pikes, to be fair, but also the pikes are not going to be the thing that you want dealing damage to trolls. The cave trolls may not be as strong as some of the other trolls on the field in sustained melee, but they're exactly the sort of thing you want to see against pikemen. And they are getting through, and they will be able to get into these very squishy companies of archers. Exactly the sort of thing you want to see. Meanwhile, Uruk-hai infantry up here on the walls against the Black Uruks. The problems that the Black Uruks have, of course, is that they're having to sort of single file into an already prepared defence. So that is giving the slight advantage here to the upgraded Uruk-hai infantry. But a space could be cleared, and the problem here, of course, is Isengard's main problem is going to come down here. The cave trolls actually being cut down. I gave the Uruk-hai pikemen maybe not enough credit there. They're doing well, but the cave trolls are into these Uruk-hai archers, and the Uruk-hai archers not going to do so well against trolls wielding tree trunks. But Mountain Orc Berserkers, more troops are coming forward now. That's exactly what I'd like to see, because the Cave Trolls have actually taken a bit of a beating, and the holes have been closed by Isengard, but at this point, with all of those heavy Goblin Spears coming forward, it's only a matter of time, I think, before Isengard's defence on this side of the map starts to fall away. Those Uruk-hai archers trying to kill off those trolls, but not going so well for the Uruk-hai archers over here. The Black Uruks' defeat does seem certain, but once again, just engaging the Uruk-hai infantry, making sure they can't reinforce what's going on down here, which is the real problem. The heavy Goblin Spears coming forward. The Cave Trolls mostly all dead at this point, except for that unit over there beating on the archers. So the Pikes doing their job from that perspective, but they've taken a bit of a beating, and now their formation is in a bit of disarray, which is going to allow the AP on those heavy Goblin Spears to start going to town, and also some reinforcements from the rest of the Misty Mountains army, and of course Mordor, who are also helping out. Could be just what the Doctor ordered. Meanwhile, Mordor also making plays here in the middle. In fact, Angmar making plays over here in the middle as well. So some good combined teamwork over here. You can see the Sauron's Will getting stuck in against the Dwarven Infantry, and with those Axemen as well, that's a lot of AP. Basic Dwarven Infantry is still very strong, and their skill will be able to outmatch basic Orc Axemen, but the numbers here are the problem, and the Trolls are also a real kicker. The Orc fodder getting in here just for the numbers. This single unit of Axemen, for example, probably will start to falter against these Ironfoot warriors. That's not a sign that the defenders wanted to see either, though. Temple Executioners moving forward, because that's a unit which only the best of the Dwarven Infantry will be able to match 1-to-1. There's a lot of routing going on here from Mirkwood, and that bodes ill. Yeah, and I feel as though this is going to be the problem here. The outer defences, if you want to commit to the outer defence on CARN DUM, which is not something I'd advise personally, based on how the map is, particularly against the Orcs like this, I feel as though you're much better off trying to leverage the higher ground in your skirmishes, particularly where Mirkwood is concerned. But Angmar, obviously, with their brute force here, too much for Mirkwood, and I think a retreat is in order. The Thurney Tower already over there, Hiriek. So, pretty substantial victory over here for Angmar. Obviously going to help their allies as well now, wrapping up the lines, which is obviously going to lead the first layer to fall squarely into the hands of the attackers. Still a lot of fight left to go, however, and these Orc fodder are going to get absolutely nowhere against Ironfoot warriors. There's still those catapults, of course, which could do huge damage. We've seen that in the past. The crossbows are in an ideal position to start firing down onto the approaching attackers. There's a lot of units still up here, a lot of strong units as well. Meanwhile, just a singular Cave Troll left, trying to sort of smash his way through these Uruk-hai archers. So the Cave Trolls, maybe not a textbook use of them, but still very useful nonetheless. We can also see the heavy Goblin Spears have indeed managed to push their way through the Uruk-hai pikemen. Snaga Skirmish is also getting in, so the Misty Mountains, Mordor and Angmar all doing their jobs as they move forward. Now the Mountain Orc Berserkers getting up on the walls, giving some assistance to the Black Uruks. The Uruk-hai infantry still holding the line actually, but ultimately the pressure will tell and they will start to fall away. And there's obviously still a fair amount of resources which the attackers can commit forward from outside the walls as well. Mordor being very aggressive. That is something that I've noticed actually about all of the matches that Ricky Beagle has played as Mordor. He has not been shy about using his elite units early, which I feel as though is something which people are weirdly unprepared for a lot of the time. And you can see how quickly that the Orc elites are able to just sort of carve through this very, very light defence which the Dwarves put on. A single unit of pikes and two units of infantry is going to be sufficient to beat Orc fodder and basic Orc units. But if you come forward in force like this, particularly with the support of trolls, then they're not going to be enough. And you need to be prepared if you're going to sort of defend the first layer of any fortress, really. If the enemy come forward in force, you need to respond in kind, otherwise you're going to be losing men, and they're just going to be able to consolidate their resources and just sort of push through. However, this is where the defenders can make a bit of a comeback, because this is going to be a pretty brutal front line to go through. The dwarves and the elves need to commit more, however. The Olag-hai are going to be able to beat Ironfoot pikes, and they can't afford to lose the catapult. Elites are moving forward now from the dwarves, so Erebor, I think, getting the memo, they finally need to commit forward something a little bit more substantial, and the Dragon Slayers are certainly that, but it's a single unit. They need more, they need these Ironfoot spears on the front line, I think. They just need numbers to sort of slow down the momentum that the attackers have at this point in time. We shall see. Meanwhile, again, Angmar pretty much consummate victors over here, defeating all of the elves. Good to see. Well, I'm sure that most people disagree. Most people want to root for the elves in this sort of situation, but again, it's wise play from the attackers here. They're doing everything they need to, and it's really on the defenders at this point, because it is a 3v3 after all. The defenders, a singular mistake is not really likely to bite them as much as it would be if it were a 4v3. The catapult is firing in at close range, and I'm sure that they're probably hoping for some point-blank troll fire, And they are hitting stuff. They're getting a lot of kills actually on Angmar, Halberds and Gundabad Guard as they move forward. But again, 2 units of very strong trolls, Sauron's Will, Temple Executioners, serious units. That's a little bit more like it than the catapult. That's a substantial hit, and this is where being very aggressive can start to bite you. If the catapult and the crossbows manage to get significant kills as they move forward, this attack could fall apart, and the reinforcements a little bit too far away. So that is where the defenders can start to make up some ground. However, that's at least in the middle. Over on the flanks, the Misty Mountains seem to be consolidating. There's also the Númenórean Lancers in here as well. So the Misty Mountains obviously very, very easily seeing off that skeleton crew defense from Isengard as well. I'd be interested to see what Angmar do. I feel as though with the resources they still have, the attackers would certainly be best off trying to pressure every choke point rather than just the middle one. I feel as though Angmar need to sort of start attacking the side now, as well as the Misty Mountains, because they can't really just rely on this fight in the middle. I mean, they are still doing very well for themselves, but as soon as the trolls and the really high damage units start to fall away, the dwarves should start to stabilise. This catapult crew is being accosted now in melee by the trolls wielding great shields, the trolls of Angmar. Some Ironfoot crossmen who are presumably out of ammunition. More spears cresting the hill as well, coming in to try and finish the trolls off. A little bit scattered, however, this Mordor force at this point. Defeat seems certain. The halberds not really in a unified formation. Here come the javelins, however. Only orc javelins, but cheap javelins are a great way to secure some value for your army. They and the Snaga skirmishers very much of the same mindset that you don't have to spend a great deal to get a bunch of good armour-piercing damage done, which will be especially effective against the dwarven infantry, you would have to say, if they can get the right angle of fire. At the moment, they're kind of firing into this blob over here, which is mainly hitting catapult crewmen. Meanwhile, the Dragon Slayers, Bouncer forces is evenly matched. The Aradirith are coming in here now. You can see how quickly the AP damage of the Aradirith managed to finish off those Trolls of Angmar. I'm not sure. They need to commit themselves here. The Dragon Slayers need to stay in melee because they're the thing which is really holding down this front line. As soon as they leave, Temple Executioners are going to go in again. I'm never really a big fan of this. When you commit forward an elite unit and you want to sort of save them for the end, so you pull them out, the Dragon Slayers' presence on this front line is needed. Otherwise, you know, as soon as the Barrow Wights arrive, I should say, they are going to struggle. I mean, the Aradirith are a very good unit. Good AP damage, but they're not multiple HP. They will not have the staying power of something like the Dragon Slayers in melee, so I don't agree with pulling those Dragon Slayers out. Needed to stay there, in my opinion. We'll see if that comes back to haunt the defenders. Meanwhile, this Isengard defense, to be fair, is much scarier. Those crossbows on either side from Grenlock. And he's also got a lot more infantry over here, which will be able to back up the pikes this time, although to be fair, here, the Snaga skirmishers wavering, but still able to get a few payloads off into these Uruk-hai formations. There's also the Berserkers over here, which actually the Berserkers have got the armour upgrade as well. Berserkers very, very damaging. Should be exactly what the Doctor ordered against the Misty Mountains army. Their only survivability really comes from their armour in most cases. There are a few exceptions, of course, as there always are, but mostly the Berserkers will be able to chew their way through. The bread and butter of the Misty Mountains force. There's a lot of javelins still just showering into this choke point over here. The Ironfoot crossbowmen still trying to hold down the front line. The catapults are sort of swivelling on the spot. Those Barrow Wights' defeat seems certain. Again, the Barrow Wights are a little bit stretched here, which is probably where the attacks are coming undone here in the middle. They did a good job initially, but now, unfortunately, the defenders are committed forward enough and they're a little bit stretched out. The Barrow Wights need to be all on the front line. They need more as well. The Barrow Wights alone are not going to be able to do this job. They need more reinforcements, more Sauron's Will on the way forward. I think the problem Mordor might have actually is they don't really have a great deal of disposable troops. They don't have enough fodder really. The Misty Mountains and Angmar do. They do not. Meanwhile, Angmar are starting to make moves over here now, which is good. They definitely need to start moving because that middle fight is not going too well for the attackers at this point. Angmar halberds moving forward, which Halberdier's not really that great against Mirkwood. I mean, the phalanx will still be useful, but the AP not so much, and obviously the halberds are not the finest quality. So Mirkwood, when it comes down to just pure melee, should be just fine. They're definitely going to need the support of stuff like the Guardians of CARN DUM. Maybe even the Blackwatch Legion to push their way through early here, try and get into those Mirkwood skirmishers, because obviously Mirkwood a little bit more lightweight, particularly than the Dwarves of Erebor, their allies for today. As the Angmar halberds come forward, try and get their phalanx set up. Defeat is already a distinct possibility, however they're winded as well. You can see Mirkwood already coming in here with the banks of defenders. The Delupang are on their way over here now as well, and obviously that body piercing could be absolutely brutal. Got to remember as well, there's gates on the interior as well, so the attackers may need to go back and get their pieces of siege equipment if they want to get in. Ooh, and there goes, is that the last? Yeah, it is. It's the last troll catapult, so another good catch there from the catapult crew of Mirkwood. Only 5 of them remaining, managing to do a job for their teams. That means the troll catapult crew are now going to be relegated entirely to their melee capabilities. They poked a few holes in the wall, but now they're going to need to get stuck in just like their troll brethren before them as they see the corpses ahead of them as the dwarves pushing back against the attacks at this point. But with the barrow wights and the catapult crew, troll catapult crew, on the front line, we'll see if that continues. Here come the Nazgul, which I missed in the army competition. They do blend in a little bit after all. Obviously very, very potent. But at this point, I think the barrow wights are just going to be here to sort of keep this attack going, perhaps. Still a lot of Mordor pressure. But I do feel as though now the attackers are going to have to try and make something happen elsewhere, because I don't think Mordor have got the manpower left to really punch through the middle in the way that maybe they need to. These Uruk-hai archers, bit of a skirmish fight going on. Well, actually, no, not a skirmish fight, a counter-attack. And as much as I appreciate being aggressive, I think this was a mistake from Grenlock. He chased far too far with his Uruk-hai infantry, and they're now just being focused down. This was a fight they were always going to struggle a little bit with. Ricky Beagle has sent over, I think, a bit too much of his disposable fodder to help the Misty Mountains when he needed it in the middle with himself. The Misty Mountains have got enough manpower, I think, to sort of take care of themselves in this situation, and a bit of a freebie for the Misty Mountains, able to catch this unit of Uruk-hai infantry out of position. 2 units of Uruk-hai infantry, I think, in fact. Certainly looks like 2. That looks like more than 36 men in focus, but I guess not. No, it is, yeah. So 2 units of Uruk-hai infantry caught out of position. And that's bad for Isengard. They can't really afford to lose too much more in terms of manpower. They actually managed to break off the Snaga skirmishers, which is not a bad catch, to be fair, getting rid of those javelins, but the crossbowmen, I think, are the real danger of the Misty Mountain skirmish forces here, which the archers, I think, yeah, they're already trying to focus them down, which is a good move from Grenlock. If you can stop the attacking crossbows, then a lot of the Misty Mountains punch also disappears. Hello. More cave trolls? Big committal of cave trolls here from the Steward of Dale, then. Interesting moves. Meanwhile, Misty Mountains crossbows are now starting to shoot into this pike block for Isengard. A single unit of pikes I don't think is going to be enough to stop the onslaught when it does come. But something has to give somewhere. The attackers are going to have to go through a very dangerous area of skirmishers. There's Goblin infantry routing outside the walls over there. Whether it be Mirkwood or Isengard, however, they're going to need to do something here, the attackers. If they just sort of filter in, they're going to allow the defenders to get a lot of value off their very varied skirmishers. Now this is good to see. Angmar moving forward in numbers. They're not feeding kills into Mirkwood. The Delupeng, Em and Dwi are clearly not getting the value they need at the moment. They need to get out of here, actually, because if the Delupeng fall, that's a terrible and grievous loss. So Angmar doing what Angmar does best, using their brute strength to get into the elves. And once again, the elves not really prepared for this sort of thing. I think the elven player was hoping for a little bit more of an organised fight, but Angmar so far denying him that, coming forward with the Witch King's Fist. Hiripeng reloading, but already being interrupted. The Delupeng are over here, and I did see them a minute ago. Where are they? Yep, the Athalion Nanwe. So Thranduil himself has come forward to try and patch this gap, but there are only so many of them, but they are incredibly potent, of course. In order to sort of deal with them, you can see the Blackwatch Legion were what caused the problems over here, and the Trolls are now sort of adding to that. Angmar coming forward with the Blackguard and the Hammer Guard. They're going to absolutely be needed to kill the Athalion Nanwaith. Both units of them, I think, are going to need to jump on them, because obviously this is one of the strongest infantry units in the game. Certainly more skillful than anything on Angmar's roster, but skill is not really coming into it over here. Dex is very much a dump stat for Angmar. They're just moving forward with their brute strength and doing well so far, I have to say. Mirkwood ill prepared to deal with that. Meanwhile, here in the middle, only the Barrow-wights, so Mordor, I think, have just sort of filtered their reinforcements to help both sides. They still have a few units over here. The Sauron's Will and the Black Legion of Barad-dûr are on the way. But I think they're just sort of waiting for the opportune moment to start pushing in the middle again, as soon as their allies on both flanks start making some moves. And it looks as though now is going to be the time. The dwarves are pushed quite far away from their reinforcements, and this is going to allow a combination of the Olag-hai and the Black Legion of Barad-dûr to start pushing against this pretty thin dwarven defensive line. There's some Aradirith in there as well, but it's mostly crossbows and spears, which the Olag-hai are going to have no issues whatsoever, slowly but surely mulching their way through that. The Black Legion also over there as well. Let's go and see how the Misty Mountains are getting on. Misty Mountains are now pushing forward. The crossbows, however, are always going to be a bit of a sticky opponent for the Misty Mountains to deal with in this situation, although there's only one bank of them still there. The archers still trying to get some value. The Black are sort of pushing forward. The Misty Mountains at this point just applying a bit of pressure, sort of biding their time, because I think the attackers realise that with what's happening over on this side, if Angmar can keep this up, the defenders are going to need to send more and more over there to try and stop them, and that's going to leave the door open both in the middle and in the south, where the Misty Mountains are starting to make their own moves. Eerie Peng moving over here, obviously. Heavy Elven Archers and no jokes in melee either. You see also the Sons of Durin, so more and more serious units being committed forward here by the defenders, but it might already be too late. They might have needed those reinforcements earlier. The damage may already be being done. Their defensive line's not really in great shape. The Trolls of Gundabad spread out quite a lot. They're doing damage to an awful lot as well. You can see there the Athalioni Nanwaith are on the front line, but they are now engaged with the Hammer Guard, with the Pikes, and with the Black Guard, as well as the Trolls. And as soon as the Athalioni Nanwaith fall, the Blackwatch Legion are coming forward now to try and disrupt the Mirkwood formation even more. This is a situation in which the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders as well won't be taking too much in the way of arrow fire, shielded by a lot of their own men, so they might be able to do a little bit more of their damage. More and more Angmar forces pouring forward. This will of course take its toll on Angmar. They will be very depleted come the late game, but this is going to be a problem for the defenders. The Erebor Legionaries trying to sort of push forward and halt this advance, but the Witch Realm Hammer Guard are there. That's AP. Guardians of CARN DUM very durable as well, absorbing some of the missile fire. And it's sheer weight of numbers at this point. More is needed over there if they're going to stop the Angmar advance. That will of course leave them wide open elsewhere. That skeleton crew of a defence again at the base of the hill, overwhelmed for the dwarves, the Black Legion of Barad-dûr and the Olag High doing the business. Now moving on to the next wave of the defence. And again, it's just Ironfoot Spears, which the Olag High are going to have no issues with dealing damage to. The Ironfoot Spears, of course, have got the Spear Malice, not AP, so the Olag High have all the advantages, and when they're being backed up by the Black Legion of Barad-dûr, it's only going to add to their advantage. There's more spears back there. The Axe Guard of Erebor are needed on the front line, really. That AP is exactly the sort of thing which is needed right now. And now you can see once again, pushing forward, being aggressive. The Cave Trolls have decided that the time is now. And rather perplexingly, they have broken the Snaga skirmishers, but the Uruk-hai crossbows are going for the Misty Mountains skirmishers. That's the wrong move. I mean, when this is happening right in front of your crossbow line, you need to do something to help your infantry. It's clear that the infantry fight is going against you. Yes, the Misty Mountains crossbows are a danger, but at this point, they're a bigger fish to fry. And as now they're sort of readjusting their fire, trying to go after the spears, but again, I feel as though the damage might already have been done. The White Uruk Fearmongers are on the front line, the Cave Trolls smashing their way through that initial pike block. Now the Uruk-hai Berserkers are being sort of engaged in melee, which they will do quite well against these sorts of opponents usually, but their positioning is all wrong, and they are going to be sort of getting surrounded here. There goes Thranduil, unsurprisingly, as Angmar's push continues. And again, this hasn't been mass pushes as such, this has just been sheer weight of numbers which has done the damage here, and the defenders have not committed enough resources forward where it has been needed thus far. The balance of power is still relatively even though, and obviously whether or not all of these sacrifices Angmar has made will be worth it will somewhat depend. Meanwhile, will that gate close? The Sons of Durin being sort of committed as the rear guard, which is sort of says it all really about the state that the defenders are in. And that gate is still open. The opportunity exists for the Orcs to get in there, and then the gate will not close as the rain comes down in the shadow of CARN DUM's town centre. The Blackwatch Legion, Bouncer forces evenly matched. Obviously, the Blackwatch Legion are not the best unit in sustained melee anyway, and certainly not against the Sons of Durin. Sons of Durin are absolute monsters when it comes to a melee fight, especially against heavily armoured units like the ones they are facing. So it says defeat seems certain, but that's mainly coming down to the damage the Trolls are doing, and overall, as time wears on, the Sons of Durin will ultimately have victory there. Meanwhile, this is another rearguard action, but again, I feel as though if they were going to retreat, they should have saved the Axe Guard of Erebor. Instead, they were committed forward, and the Barrow-wights slowly but surely moving their way forwards as well, helping the Black Legion, helping the Olag High. The Olag High at this point have sort of slightly run out of steam, and I imagine a big part of that was probably the Axe Guard of Erebor coming into the fight, but even so, I mean, it's still a matter of these units are all going to perish facing off against this force that Ricky Beagle still has in reserve, and now we can see cavalry also doing the job for them. The Bolg's champions managed to get in behind the lines and able to get some hammer and anvil. Bolg's champions therefore not being a total waste to bring. The Uruk-hai crossbows are routing. Temple Executioners coming up from Mordor, so again, well executed push from the Misty Mountains. When they pushed forward in numbers. And very, very quickly, Isengard's defensive position was found wanting without the necessary reinforcements or reactions to really save it. So far, the attackers have played a very good game, in my opinion. You can see here the defenders sort of getting ready. I mean, we're near enough in the final 10,000 frames, and you can see already the attackers have got a big advantage in terms of the numbers, but the quality, however, may be a little bit different. After all, a lot of the really strong units for the attackers have already been committed, whereas the defenders do have a lot of theirs left in reserve. And I don't know if saving them will have been worth it, however. Now you can see here the Sons of Durin being used as the rear guard, taking a rear charge from the Bolg's champions, so certainly here Bolg and his champions proving to be a very worthwhile investment here, just clearing up this middle layer, allowing the attackers to make up more ground. That was a pretty meek charge, all things considered, but that will probably be enough to give a very distinctive advantage. Only 14 of them left alive now. The Sons of Durin are mighty indeed, but once again, they've been given a task which they alone cannot accomplish. Not enough of sort of standing united here from the defenders, I feel, whereas the attackers have very much worked in unison. Mentioned a couple of battles ago in the Mountain Pass how the blue team that day had far superior teamwork. I feel as though that is kind of the case again here. The attackers have definitely worked in unison a lot better than the defenders. Well, I mean, that gate is still open. The Orcs just, the Sons of Durin, it goes to show how durable they really are, because they're still there, standing in the face of all of this pressure. The Witches are still there, and they have not used any of their ammunition yet, which is most certainly worrying for the defenders, because all it takes is for them to get one nice angle on the choke point, and they're going to be able to do tons and tons of damage, which would of course mean this fight is all but over. Again, it's going to be tricky for the defenders to come back from this. It's not impossible, they still have some good tools. In particular, the Delupeng, Ian and Dwyer, they're very depleted, but they also have the Lurtz hunting pack, and also I think the Black Locks. All three of the body-piercing units are still here, so if they were to position them around a singular choke point the attackers were pushing through, that would be a devastating crossfire that they would be able to inflict on them. Let's have a look at what's going on down here. Sons of Durin still holding. So again, there's not really a great deal. Well, I mean, the Witcher and Blackguard are on the front line now, but I guess they were fighting pikes for a while, which pikes will take a long way to poke their way through the heavy armour of the Sons of Durin, and of course multiple HP. Are the Misty Mountains going to be able to smash their way through the gate? Obviously you can't sort of... Blackback Mountain Berserkers also revealing themselves. You can't obviously commit your infantry sort of to get through the gates in Medieval 2. You do need a ram or a piece of siege equipment, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, I do feel as though, if it were possible, it would be pretty neat if you were to sort of give X-Men the ability to very slowly but surely chop down gates. I mean, it's a very niche thing, so it wouldn't obviously be a very high priority, but it would still be fairly neat. Meanwhile, there we go, the Sons of Durin finally succumbing to this sustained pressure that Angmar had put on them as the rain continues to fall. Again, you can see the lines here, the waves, and I'm not a fan of waves, not in this situation, not when the attackers have already very much set a precedent for committing forward men in numbers, and as if he heard me, Hellcase is going to commit forward another unit of Ironfoot Warriors to sort of shore this line up. Lance Hunting Pack don't have a particularly good angle. I mean, they're managing to get a few sort of stray hits off on these forces here. Angmar Halberd's actually shaken. But you have to say, looking at the numbers, I mean, all of these units, most of them anyway, are very elite, the best of the best. But therefore, again, just sort of arcing those shots. Bit of a shame from the perspective, but very elite units really left all around, but the numbers discrepancy is massive at this point. And you have to say the attackers probably have all the right tools. Mordor going back to fetch their ram with some fodder, they're going to be able to open up the second choke point, which I think is the straw which finally breaks the camel's back, because the defenders might be able to win if it were just one choke point with all their quality. But 2, they're going to have to divide their attention, more importantly divide their skirmishers, and that's going to allow the attackers to push through on one of the sides at the very least. And here the Black Legion of Barad-dûr charging forth into the front line. That is the Black Bloc Engineers. I mean, they're going to be able to do a lot of damage. I mean, not as much as they might like with these arced shots, but I mean, it's still pretty substantial damage. Here come the Black Legion, trying to push their way through, but there are spears, there are guards of Orthanc in formation there. The Black Legion are going to be able to sort of push their way through into the Lurtz hunting pack, but this is going to cost them very dearly. You can see how quickly they're just being slaughtered. But this gap could be exactly what they need to sort of force more and more orcs in. The Blackwatch Legion, a ton of Witch Realm units as well coming forward. So Angmar once again basically committing their full might to try and capitalise on that move from Ricky Beagle. Nazkai moving over here, but you have to say that this is looking very, very bleak for the defenders. I don't think the Rohirrim are going to arrive to bail them out as the orcs come forward once again, doing the damage. Still a lot of pikes, a lot of halberds. Gundabad Guard still in there. The Witch Realm Blackguard still looking fairly healthy. The Hammer Guard are a little bit more beaten up, presumably incurring the wrath a little bit more of the Athalioni Nunwith. Some of those shield bashing units obviously pushing their way all the way through to here, but their reward for that is going to be, unfortunately, a shallow grave, I feel like, because they are just going to be cut to pieces very, very quickly. But they did their job. They disrupted the skirmishers and they allowed Angmar's units to get into position. I mean, it's still not a surefire thing yet. Angmar taking some damage, but ultimately I think the real problem for the defenders is going to happen on the other gate right now, because the defenders could win this fight against Angmar over here. I don't think they're going to be able to win this fight against another on-rushing force over here. Temple Executioners, we know there are Blackback Mountain Berserkers, we know there's a Goblin King Bodyguard, White Uruk Fearmongers, all of the right units. Nazkai, Obsidian Guard, and Black Blocks, all very serious units, of course. But again, it's going to come down to a numbers game here, and it's a numbers game I don't think the defenders are going to be able to win. Here come the White Uruk Fearmongers, of course, the Ghetto Fountain Guard themselves. As far as halberdiers go, or at least armour-piercing phalanx units go, they are a very potent force indeed. And the Cave Trolls are also just parking themselves in melee as well, with their giant stone mallets and their tree trunks. I do like the model that Crimson Behemoth did for them. It makes the trolls look far more scary. Much more indicative of their true power. Meanwhile, over here, the defenders have managed to shore the line up. Angmar stopped dead in their tracks, and Angmar will probably end up losing this fight over the long run. The Barrow-wights are getting in here now, depleted as they are. Those are the Witchers. Oh, hello. They're reloading. Do they have a shot, would be my question. I mean, they risk actually destroying their own army by shooting from there, but I'm not sure they do have a shot. I mean, I think they are somewhat obstructed. And it looks like they're going to fire at any minute, so I'm loath to look over to the other choke point. I mean, we'll just have a quick peek. Sort of trying to sort of keep an eye on the fact if we see any fiery ribbons of justice over the hill there, but you can see here that the mass is a real problem. A little bit better shots for the Blacklocks over here, but they're going to be closed down in melee pretty quickly, you would imagine. The Obsidian Guard are fighting and victory seems certain, but alone, eventually they will fall. Those Witches are still reloading. I don't think they do have a shot. I think the Dwarves and the forces of Isengard are too close to their own front lines, and obviously they work very much in the same way. To other hand-thrown projectile units, when they're obstructed, it can be a bit of a nightmare to shoot their payloads. Not as much of a pain as it is with the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, I have to say. Easily the worst unit to try and deal with the obstruction things on. I feel as though friendly fire shouldn't matter. I feel as though you should have a toggle to just sort of say, you know what, damn the friendly fire, just fire the artillery and the Dragon's Wrath crossbows. There goes a general, which I can only imagine to be Isengard's, because he blends in very much with the Nazkai. So at the hands of the Blackbacks...
Our enemy has command of the castle.
Well, yes, of course they do. The Witch King very much eager to make himself a home in CARN DUM once more. And I think the Witches have just pulled back. Yes, they have. Not having the ideal shot. Defeat still seems certain for the Angmar forces over here, actually. The Delupang trying to fire, but again, these body-piercing missiles, I think, are being slightly wasted. Trying to go into the Temple Guard, but not really worth it. While the Blacklock Engineers doing damage to more forces as they move forward. And to give the defenders their credit, they have sort of halted the tide of progress which the attacks have made, and just imagine what they could have accomplished if all of these elite units had been committed sooner. I know I sound a bit like a broken record at this point, saying it over and over again, but you should not be shy of committing forward your elites early. If the attackers are doing it, you as the defenders can do it also to thunderous success, particularly if you've got them backed up by units like the Lurtz Hunting Pack and the Blacklocks, because that body piercing is going to be lethal. You can see already the goblins starting to rout. You know, it's. I think it's a bit of a shame that the defenders have painted themselves into a corner. I don't think they're going to be able to pull out the victory here. I mean, it would be miraculous if they did. The Orc announcer, meanwhile, is getting a bit overexcited about the fate of the town centre. Obviously, there's still at. Oh, hello. A miss from the Witchers, managing to singe what was already a dead body. They could be going after the Delupang. I mean, if they're going to fire at the Delupang, they should do it now, and indeed I think they are. Yeah, that's pretty much the complete end of the Rangers there. Not devastating from the Witchers. Ooh. Rather unfortunate timing for the Blacklocks to get back into position here, because now they're just about to be grilled by the Witchers. I certainly wouldn't have sent them over here if I were Hellcase, and this is going to be the end of the Blacklocks. Which, when the Blacklocks go, that's going to be the certain end of the defenders' hopes, and at this point the announcer is really getting on my nerves. There are the Bolg champions who have pushed through, or at least one of them managing to push through. Now he's sort of interrupting the Lurtz Hunting Pack, who are now being committed to melee. There you can see the Goblin King Bodyguard and the Blackback Berserkers, the two scariest Misty Mountains unit alongside the Temple Executioners, doing work in melee. And there are still units outside the gate waiting to be committed. Temple Guard and Orc Fodder. Still those Numenorean Lancers, which haven't been as useful as the Bolg champions, but at least they're alive. Here come the Javelins, which are much easier to sort of get them to shoot than the Witchers, firing their payloads in. This defensive line over here still holding its ground and would potentially actually win this fight. I mean, the Barrow Wights are not the most devastating in terms of their damage, they just last a long time in melee. But it's going to be these units over here which ultimately are going to be the match winners for the attackers in the end, I feel. We shall see. The Nazkai and the Obsidian Guard still doing their best to hold the line, but no, they're going up against elite units as well, so it's not like they're going up against just any old garbage. It is the best that the attackers had to offer, certainly the best that the Misty Mountains and Mordor had to offer over there.
Our enemy has command of the castle.
Well, the Orc announcer is really getting his rocks off over the town centre. There are the Barrow Wights obviously over here. Angmar has done a lot of heavy lifting in this fight. Mirkwood in particular were just not prepared to deal. Both of their defences that they set up on the first layer and the second layer were just not substantial enough. It would have been much better to just have one big defence on the second layer, I think. As it is, he's probably learnt a valuable lesson about not fronting up to Angmar, about allowing them to sort of display their raw physical power, because he was the one that ultimately paid the price for that. And the Dwarves and Isengard have tried to stop Angmar, and they would ultimately, I think, be successful in killing Angmar, but that's not the problem. The problem is going to be the reinforcements. Percentages have closed pretty dramatically, as you would possibly expect with all the elites that the defenders still had, with the Blacklocks, the Obsidian Guard, Temple Executioners and Nazkai on the front line. And it may ultimately actually, I think it probably will actually end up being a within 10% battle. So it goes to show just fine margins. Big lead the attackers pulled out. What could have been from a defensive perspective, there are still two Delupang after the rest of their unit got fried by the Witchers. There's still Orc Fodder to be committed, Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen as well, who presumably have actually got a bit of a shot onto the Blacklock Engineers. Those Blackbacks have been fighting in melee pretty relentlessly. What other reserves they have? The Numenorean Lancers could push their way through, make a nuisance of themselves. The Orc Fodder could just be committed forward for numbers. Temple Guard are on their way over here. I don't know though. Well, their Saurons will as well. There's also the Witchers, which are still somewhere, I think. Can't imagine they've used up all their ammunition. Orc Javelins. Where are the Witchers? Did they get committed to melee? That would be a very baffling decision. They do blend into the Barrow Wight, so it's very difficult to sort of tell. More forces being committed forward. I mean, again, it's going to be tight, but I can't imagine that the defenders have got enough to pull this out. Where'd those cavalrymen go? There they are. Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen getting around the flank. They're going to start firing into the backs of these units over here, which is almost certainly going to be the final nail in the coffin. Realising the problem, the Lurtz Hunting Pack, I thought they were turning around to engage the crossbows, but instead they broke. Here come the Númenórean Lancers. And here we see the attackers flexing their muscles for what I think will be the final time in this fight. Fair play to them. This is the risk with being very aggressive as the attackers, of course. In the late game you do run out of steam a little bit more than perhaps is usual. But as long as you pull out a good lead, as long as you face a defensive force which sets itself out like the one they fought, it's always going to end positively, I think, for you. Here come the Orc fodder, coming in for the glory. Obviously the Nazgul are in there, yeah, with the Nazgul, there was never any doubt. Here come the Númenórean Lancers with a nice rear charge, which again is just going to cement the defenders' fate. Obviously Mordor with their Minas Morgul inspired green capes on their Númenórean Lancers, unlike the burgundy which Angmar have, and I believe the deep blue that Númenor will have in the next match, of course. Who'd have known that Númenor would have the Númenórean Lancers? This announcer is really concerned about the fate of the castle, and now the Númenórean Lancers really not performing a vital service here, just making sure that the attackers get over the line. And it is within 10%, which for a large scale fight like this denotes a close fight. Sort of the metric I use anyway. That is going to be it, so the attackers win. But only 9% of their total force remaining, and obviously that doesn't count those that have broken off, which, as their orcs, a few of their units will have. We saw those goblin infantrymen running for the hills, of course, so in reality probably a little bit closer even than that. But yeah, I think well played from the attackers here. I think their tactics were good. The defenders, this was there for them to win. CARN DUM is a very nice settlement to defend, especially with the skirmish power they had available to them. Those Dwarven and Isengard crossbows combined with the Mirkwood arrows, lethal combination, potentially. But I feel as though they just didn't set themselves out right. I think I was always a little bit concerned when I saw their first layer defence. I felt like it wasn't substantial enough, especially from the Dwarves and Isengard. They may as well not bothered. You know, it's always good to sort of put units there so the attackers waste a bit of artillery ammunition and then you pull back, sort of baiting things out. That's like how it's been in Medieval 2 for a long time, of course. And now the castle finally in control of the attackers, which obviously the announcer's going to be very pleased with. But yeah, I feel as though that was the difference here. They should have just baited out some artillery shots and then pulled back to the next layer. There goes King Dane, the last one left alive, and there they go. So obviously here's Reshade at work again, a very bright and incandescent results screen. Ricky Beagle getting the least kills. I think he probably took... again, his army was a little different, shall we say, and he was definitely playing the supporting role more so than the other two who were definitely sort of doing the grunt work, and Angmar in particular did very well at that. I feel as though Angmar pushing through Mirkwood was definitely what ultimately won the attackers this fight. As for the defenders, Isengard getting a good amount of kills. I feel as though the crossbows on the substantial Misty Mountains force certainly helped them with that, and obviously they had quite a lot of their elites left at the end as well. Nazkai, Lurtz Hunting Pack, Guards of Orthanc to try and hold the town centre. Mirkwood getting the least doesn't surprise me because they were definitely overwhelmed by Angmar, and again I feel as though some people in the comments will inevitably, as I'm sure, sort of point this out as the fact that the attackers and the orcs are OP. This is not the case at all. This was just poor judgment from the defenders. This was right there for the defenders to win that. Even, you know, their compositions, there was nothing wrong with it. It was how they set themselves out. Again, as I've said, layers only work if you have sort of very distinct, very strong layers, and I feel as though Mirkwood in particular were very guilty of having layers that were too flimsy to withstand the Angmar onslaught. But let's have a look at what did the damage for Angmar. Just about can see it with the bright glow that Reshade is now providing me. The Witchers getting 182 kills, so presumably they did get a volley which I did not see. But ultimately 182 kills for the Witchers is reasonably devastating, I suppose. Again, it's the sort of thing which could have tilted the fight in favour of the attackers had I seen it. Trolls of Gundabad doing very well. Obviously they did very well against Mirkwood in sustained melee. The Trolls of Angmar had a little bit more of an uphill fight going through that middle road. They did shut down the catapult for a while but couldn't finish it off. Blackwatch Legion obviously providing that pushing power that the orcs often need. The pikemen, the anchor, Guardians of CARN DUM, the survivability. And then the Hammer Guard obviously getting 110 kills as well, more than the Black Guard in this case, and the Scourge Raiders only 28, but it's neat to see the Scourge Raiders for once at the very least. So yeah, well played to the attackers. I feel as though they worked in unison very well. It was a close fight though, and I feel as though if the defenders just sort of adjusted their defence a little bit more, they could have won this fairly simply with their elites and obviously with their ranged power. But as it was, well played to the attackers. Hope you enjoyed this. This is one that I've been sat on for a little while at this point, so I wanted to do this one. Next, I think we'll finally be getting around to that RP fight between CARN DUM and Rune that I want to do. And then after that, I do have one on Edoras, which I'm quite eager on doing, and I also will be doing sort of a 2-in-1 style thing again, where I show a couple of 1v1s off as well, because a 1v1 is relatively short, so we can fit 2 into the usual length of video that I post. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.